In a chilling courtroom scene, Isabel Martinez, accused of brutally killing nearly her entire family, sat before the judge with an unnerving demeanor. Smiling, she knelt down for the cameras, even flashing a thumbs up. Shocked by her behavior, the judge interrupted, "Ma'am, I'm going to caution you to cut out the display for the cameras. It's really not a good idea and probably not to your benefit." His words, however, seemed to barely register. How did this mother of five reach such a dark place? And what could have driven her to this tragic moment? Isabel Martinez was born in Michoacán, Mexico in 1984, though the exact date is unclear. Not much is known about her early years or family background, other than that she was the daughter of Maria Elena Martinez and grew up in a small town named Benito Juarez. At the age of 20, Isabel crossed the border illegally and moved to the United States. Shortly after, she began a relationship with a man whose identity remains unknown, with whom she had a daughter, also named Isabel, born in 2007. Left to raise her daughter alone when the father abandoned them, Isabel managed to make ends meet as a single mother. Later, while in Atlanta, Georgia, she met Martin Romero, a man from Michoacán who was around her age. Martin had come to the United States at 18 and worked various jobs in construction. Described by his family as hard-working and kind, Martin quickly bonded with Isabel, and their friendship blossomed into a relationship. After marrying, the couple moved in together and Martin took on a fatherly role for young Isabel. The couple settled in Chicago, Illinois, where their family grew with the births of two girls, Diana and Dakota Montserrat, and two boys, Dylan Martin and Axel Oliver. In hopes of finding better work opportunities, the family moved to Georgia in mid-2017, settling in a small mobile home community in Loganville, Gwinnett County, about 30 miles from Atlanta. Although they faced financial challenges, the family enjoyed a peaceful life, often gathering with Martin's relatives who had also immigrated from Mexico. Known for his love of singing, especially when around family, Martin was also a sports enthusiast and practiced martial arts for several years. Isabel, in turn, was seen as a devoted wife and mother, caring for the children and preparing for Martin's return home from work. Sandra Romero, Martin's cousin and Isabel's close friend, described them as a typical family who celebrated birthdays, gathered during holidays, and spent weekends with friends and relatives. Though new to the neighborhood, the family was considered close-knit and loving by neighbors, who often saw the children happily playing outside. However, tragedy struck when Isabel's father, with whom she had remained close despite the distance, passed away in Mexico in June 2017. Unable to attend the funeral due to her undocumented status, Isabel was heartbroken, fearing she wouldn't be able to return to her family if she crossed the border. This event deeply saddened her, with her grief soon spiraling into depression. Martin, noticing her struggle, took her to see a specialist who prescribed antidepressants. According to family, Martin administered one pill daily instead of the prescribed two, worried about potential overdose risks, but he genuinely wanted to support his wife through her pain. As the 4th of July holiday approached, Martine planned a family getaway to Savannah, where they spent time enjoying the beach and playing with the children. On July 5th, after the family returned home, Martine called one of his cousins to let him know he was back and planned to go to work that day. It seemed like a regular day, with Isabel and the children following their usual routines. However, in the early morning hours of July 6, 2017, a call came into Gwinnett Emergency Services at 4:47 a.m. A woman's voice, speaking Spanish, reported a horrific crime involving multiple victims. Initially unsure of what they were hearing, operators realized the woman was confessing to having taken the lives of her husband and 5 children. Identifying herself as Isabel, 33, she reported the devastating event that would send shockwaves through their quiet, close-knit neighborhood, primarily home to Hispanic families and beyond. When officers from the sheriff's department and emergency teams arrived, they were met with a heartbreaking scene inside the family home. In the main room lay Martine Romero, 33, with visible injuries from a sharp weapon. In one of the bedrooms, the bodies of 10-year-old Isabel, 7-year-old Dakota, 4-year-old Dylan, and 2-year-old Axel were found on the bed. Despite the severe injuries on each, paramedics checked each child, hoping to save at least one. Just as hope seemed lost, they discovered 9-year-old Diana Romero alive but in critical condition. She was rushed to the nearest hospital for urgent care. Nearby, officers found Isabel sitting among religious items, crying and reading a Bible. She had inflicted cuts on her wrists in an apparent attempt to end her life. When questioned, Isabel admitted to making the 911 call in which she confessed to taking the lives of her husband and children. After treating her self-inflicted wounds, authorities took Isabel into custody as the primary suspect in the tragic crime. Later that day, the police issued a statement expressing their shock at the horrific incident, noting that the crime had a profound impact on the victim's family, neighbors, and the entire community. They could not fathom the reasons that would drive someone to commit such an act against young children and their spouse, expressing hope and prayers for the recovery of the lone survivor. As news of the incident spread, neighbors were equally stunned, unable to understand why Isabel had turned so brutally against her family. Media coverage quickly grew, with both national and international headlines covering the tragedy. Moved by the family's fate, many locals set up a makeshift memorial outside the family home, leaving candles, flowers, balloons, and toys in remembrance of the lives lost. Community members shared their disbelief with reporters, describing how the family, though new to the area, appeared close-knit and happy, with the children often seen playing at the park or biking around the neighborhood. On July 7th, Isabel appeared at her first court hearing in Gwinnett County, facing 5 charges of intentional homicide, 5 counts of murder, and 6 counts of aggravated assault. Photos taken during the hearing spread widely, capturing Isabel among other inmates, sometimes smiling, sometimes making victory signs with her thumbs, and at other times clasping her hands in prayer or reaching her arms forward. When the judge listed the charges, Isabel's behavior grew erratic. She shook her head, smiled, and even pointed at the judge, who firmly reminded her to act appropriately in court. Through an interpreter, she responded that she did not need an attorney, stating that the people she was fighting for were her defenders. She went on to declare herself a representative of the working and burdened, saying she wanted to show them that with God's help, all is possible. Despite her unusual statements and refusal to hire a lawyer, the judge strongly advised her to seek legal counsel or accept a public defender. That same day, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement confirmed in an email that the accused was named Maria Isabel Martinez from Mexico and that she was residing in the country without documentation. Meanwhile, Diana, the only survivor of the brutal attack, remained in critical but stable condition at a pediatric hospital. She was expected to stay in the facility for 2 to 3 weeks for physical therapy and psychological support. A relative started a fundraising campaign to help cover Diana's medical treatment and the funeral expenses for her father and 4 siblings. With over 1,000 contributions, the campaign nearly reached its $50,000 goal. According to the fundraiser, Diana underwent complex surgery to repair injuries caused by multiple stab wounds. On July 11th, Isabel's public defender requested a psychological evaluation for her before the next hearing. Although there are no records of the court ordering the assessment, reports indicated that she was placed in a psychiatric facility pending trial. Meanwhile, the prosecution debated whether to seek the death penalty or life imprisonment, taking Isabel's mental health into account. While Diana continued to recover in the hospital, she was informed on July 12th that she was the only survivor from her family. On that day, she was able to leave briefly to attend the funeral for her father and siblings. Through the Mexican consulate and the migrant secretary's repatriation program, the remains of the 5 family members were returned to Michoacán, as the family could not afford the transportation costs. 11 days after the tragedy, their bodies arrived in Ciudad Hidalgo, where Martin's family held a funeral mass. They were then laid to rest at the San Jose Cemetery, where loved ones bid them a final farewell. Despite her fragile health and emotional trauma, young Diana gradually recounted the events to Child Protection Services and investigators. She revealed that her mother had taken a knife from the kitchen and attacked her siblings as they slept. When it was Diana's turn, Isabel reportedly apologized, told her she loved her, and said that soon she would go to heaven to be with Jesus. Diana begged her mother not to hurt her, but Isabel inflicted multiple wounds. Remaining conscious, Diana watched as her mother woke Martin to show him what she had done, before attacking and killing him as well. Diana recounted how her mother, though committing these acts, was calm, which terrified her deeply. Isabel then moved her children's bodies to a room, laying them side by side on a bed. She called emergency services shortly after, detailing what she had done. Once Diana was discharged from the hospital, she went to live with her uncle, Antonio Romero, Martin's brother, and his family in Atlanta. There, she continued receiving psychological support to help her cope with the traumatic events. Isabel's mother, Maria Elena Martinez, speaking from Mexico, shared that she learned of the tragedy through social media. She mentioned that 3 of her daughters, including Isabel, had struggled with mental health issues and emphasized that Isabel had long suffered from a nerve-related condition. For her, Isabel's disturbed state could explain Isabel's erratic behavior after the incident. The next development in the case occurred on April 16, 2018, when Isabel appeared for her arraignment in court at the Gwinnett County Justice and Administration Center. Though she had initially confessed, Isabel pleaded not guilty through her lawyer, claiming that a family friend, whom she never identified, was responsible for the murders. Up until that point, the district attorney had not announced plans to seek the death penalty, though it was the deadline to determine her eligibility for such punishment. Later that day, it was confirmed to local media that they would not pursue the death penalty, largely due to Isabel's apparent mental health struggles. Despite earlier reports suggesting Isabel had behaved normally in the days leading up to the tragedy, witnesses began to recount a different story. Friends and neighbors told the press that after losing her father, Isabel fell into deep sadness, which often erupted into sudden fits of anger. Following her arrest, She confided in a family and child services worker that during their trip to Savannah, she felt a demonic spirit was trying to take her children while they played on the beach. A cousin of Martine's also shared with investigators that Isabel had mentioned wanting to bring her father back by any means, hinting that she had offered the lives of her children to a dark force. Both a niece of Isabel's and one of Martine's nieces recalled hearing her say she would offer her children to God in exchange for her father's return, and that during this ordeal she had expressed intentions to put everyone in the house to sleep. Reports also surfaced that Isabel had visited a priest about 2 weeks before the tragedy, fearing that evil people were pursuing her. The priest reportedly told her she was unwell, and her fears were simply hallucinations. Investigators later found medication typically prescribed for severe depression in the family's home, further indicating her mental health concerns. As the case attracted widespread attention across the U.S. and Mexico, various media outlets consulted specialists in forensic psychiatry, crimes against children, and female mental health for insights into the tragedy. Experts suggested that, based on Isabel's behavior in court, she may have been experiencing a psychotic episode or another severe psychiatric disorder. Though a full diagnosis required further evaluation and knowledge of her medical history, experts noted that many mothers who commit filicide are often affected by significant psychiatric conditions. They also pointed out that some families may downplay or fail to recognize the warning signs. In cases where mothers kill their children under the belief of divine instruction, specialists categorize such actions as either psychotic or altruistic filicide, in which the mother believes the children are better off in heaven. However, even though these disorders are recognized by the medical community, proving them in court is often challenging. Ultimately, in 2019, Isabel went to trial without the threat of the death penalty. On April 24th, she pleaded guilty but mentally ill to 5 counts of murder, 1 count of aggravated assault, and 1 count of child cruelty for attacking her daughter Diana, the sole survivor of the horrific events of July 6, 2017. That same day, the judge sentenced Maria Isabel Martinez, then 35, to 5 consecutive life terms for the murders of her husband, Martin Romero, and their children, Isabel, Dakota, Dylan, and Axel. Additionally, she received 21 years for aggravated assault and third-degree child cruelty in connection to Diana's injuries. Isabel would serve her sentence concurrently, with eligibility for parole after 30 years. However, if ever released, she would immediately fall under immigration custody for deportation due to her undocumented status. Following her sentencing, Isabel was reportedly transferred to a mental health facility, though her current status in November 2024 remains unconfirmed. Meanwhile, Diana has continued her recovery, both physically and emotionally. Shortly after the incident, Diana was interviewed at her uncle's home in Atlanta. She mentioned she enjoyed being with her uncle Antonio, whose laugh reminded her of her father's. Antonio shared that it had been tough for everyone, but they were doing their best to move forward. He added that Diana was receiving psychological treatment and slowly adjusting to her new life. Diana seemed at ease, playing with her cousins and talking about her interest in making jewelry. Family members expressed their hope that, with time and support, Diana would be able to overcome her trauma and lead a relatively normal life. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.
Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The sad story of Juliette Ledramiguet. Juliette Ledramiguet, affectionately known as Juju, was born on May 2, 2013. Her parents are Paraguayan Lilian Zapata and Frenchman Stéphane Ledramiguet, who gave the little girl both nationalities. Charlotte, the couple's firstborn, completed their family. Eventually, the spouses divorced, and Lilian joined Rainer Oberber, a German citizen who had arrived in Paraguay just a year before to settle in the country. It was known that he had worked on projects or campaigns related to human rights in Europe. Juliette had microcephaly, a neurological condition that causes motor disabilities and cognitive developmental delays. The girl was described as a cheerful, affectionate, and lively child who enjoyed playing outdoors. From mid-March 2020, Juliette had been living on a farm in the city of Emboscada with her mother, sister, and stepfather. According to reports about the case, Rainer convinced his partner to settle there when the quarantine was imposed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Everything seemed tranquil and almost idyllic in this corner of the country, but that calm was unexpectedly and dramatically shattered on April 15, 2020. On that day, little Juliette disappeared without a trace while on the property where, in addition to her family, there were 2 workers. According to information released by the Paraguayan newspaper ABC on the morning of April 16, when the local school director realized that one of his students had been missing since the previous morning, he notified the authorities. Immediately, officers from the police station of Emboscada went to the residence of the family. It was at that moment that the mother reported her daughter's disappearance. Lilian said that the 7-year-old, who had difficulty moving, and the cognitive development of a 3-year-old, had gone missing at around 9:30 in the morning, the previous day while playing in the gated complex where they lived, along with a pair of goats that were also missing. She explained that, as time passed without her daughter returning, she asked for help from some neighbors to search the property, but they were unsuccessful. The search operation was immediately launched, involving police officers with trained dogs and the participation of local residents. As the hours passed, fears for the safety of the young girl grew. No one could believe that something like this could happen in that peaceful place. Additionally, on April 17, a team accompanied Lilian to check 2 properties in different parts of Emboscada, where they had lived, but they found no traces of the child. On the same day and in the following days, alongside search efforts, various law enforcement agencies conducted interviews with the mother, stepfather, and workers at the location. They also requested information from the telephone companies of the adults responsible for the minor and individuals connected to the case, as well as reviewed security camera footage from nearby businesses. Some witnesses reported seeing the child for the last time on April 15 at 10 in the morning. Initially, the hypothesis was that the child had gone missing while following the goats. However, investigators considered this version unlikely since the child had difficulty moving, and the goats were pregnant and did not typically stray far from the area. The property covered about 30 hectares and included several buildings. With no traces of the child found on the property, the investigation was reinforced on April 20, with the addition of prosecutors from the anti-kidnapping unit. A day later, The goats with which Juliet was said to have been playing were found. They were found in good condition, 4 kilometers in a straight line from the house, passing through a densely wooded area. Due to her motor disability, it was impossible for the girl to make that journey with the animals. The next day, the police expanded the search nationwide. During the first 2 weeks of the investigation, the prosecution team conducted several searches on the family property. These inspections resulted in the discovery of blood traces in various places, including in a van driven by Reiner. In his initial statements to the prosecution, the German citizen claimed to have left the house twice in the mentioned vehicle on the day Juliet went missing. However, the police investigation would later determine that he had actually left the property a total of 3 times. In addition to the forensic and technical work being done to determine Reiner's possible involvement in the disappearance, officials in charge of the case obtained relevant information during their interviews with various witnesses. Juliet's nanny and one of the workers on the property told detectives that Reiner easily lost his patience when it came to the younger of his daughters. On the other hand, Juliet's sister, who was 10 years old at the time, made a statement using a special system, which is used to interview minors to ensure their safety and comfort. A day later, the young girl left the country as a protective measure to reunite with her biological father in Switzerland. The prosecutor in charge of the investigation detailed that a sports shoe, a sheet, a towel, and a carpet had been seized, all of which reacted to the blood detection reagent. He also stated that tests would be conducted to determine the origin of the blood residues. The representative of the public ministry reported that new searches had been conducted at various addresses and that 2 vans owned by Reiner had been seized, as well as electronic devices. He explained that although they were investigating the case as a missing persons case, they did not rule out any hypotheses, from an intrafamily matter to the involvement of a third party. It was also reported that a computer had mysteriously disappeared from the location. When questioned about it, Reiner stated that he had sent it for repairs but couldn't say where it was being examined. As the investigations continued and knowing that the authorities considered them as suspects, Reiner and Lillian made a video offering a reward of approximately 10 million Paraguayan guaraníes, approximately $1,400 at that time's exchange rate, for any valuable information that would help them find the child. In the message, they expressed that they were deeply affected. The mother spoke directly to her daughter, saying that she missed her, as did her sister. She also explained that they were under restrictions because they were being investigated. As the days passed, Lillian and Reiner changed their initial version, which pointed to Juliet having gone missing. Instead, they now claimed that Juliet may have been abducted from the property and deprived of her freedom, a change in position that also raised suspicions among the authorities. While the prosecutors had this hypothesis on the table, it seemed unlikely because there were 200 meters from the property's entrance to the place where the child was last seen. This implied that, to take the child, the perpetrator would have had to get out of a vehicle, open a wooden gate, enter with the car, take the child and the 2 goats that had also disappeared, close the gate again, and leave. However, it was not credible that the 3 people in the house at that time did not hear the sound of a vehicle. Based on the findings during the investigations, the prosecutors charged the mother and stepfather of the child with failing in their duty of care and education, as well as abandonment. On May 4, the public ministry searched the residence and arrested Lillian, 33, and Reiner, 55. The prosecution announced that both had declined to provide an interrogatory statement and were in preventive detention. One of the figures who appeared in the media and pointed to Reiner as a suspected person was Rufino Zapata, Lillian's father and Juliet's grandfather. During a radio interview, he stated that the family had strong suspicions that his daughter's partner could not stand the little girl. While he clarified that he could not accuse, the information they had made them think that the German citizen could be linked to his granddaughter's disappearance. Furthermore, The young girl's grandfather said he believed that his daughter knew something about what happened to her granddaughter and was under pressure not to give details about the case. He also expressed that Reiner was a horrible person and he feared what he might do. In mid-May, during a video call interview, Juliet's biological father expressed his trust in the detectives and requested that a complete investigation, especially Reiner. He mentioned that since Lillian joined the German citizen, she had distanced herself from her family and only associated with his circle. He said that he did not distrust Lillian, whom he considered a loving and careful mother, especially with Juliet. Additionally, he mentioned that his other daughter had told him about a very serious matter. He said that further investigation was needed and that he had some suspicions about what might have happened to the little girl, although he didn't know who was responsible. He was certain that it wasn't an accident. According to him, his elder daughter told him about the day her little sister disappeared. The girl said that while she, her mother, and other people were searching for Juliet, Reiner remained seated in front of his computer the entire time. He added that during that day and into the night, Lillian and the little girl were searching for Juliet, but they didn't have the help they needed. While defending his ex-wife, he also suggested that, in his opinion, she was a victim and had no idea what had happened. The father of the child appointed a group of lawyers, including Oscar Tuma, to represent him. The attorneys filed a series of complaints against Juliet's stepfather, accusing him of deprivation of liberty and taking the life of his daughter. Oscar Tuma had collaborated several times with an organization which had been working since 2013 for the protection of children in Paraguay, especially those declared missing. Reiner insisted on his innocence, stating that he had nothing to do with Juliet's disappearance. On May 18, the police once again searched the Juliet family's property, but found no trace of the child. The police and the prosecution had already conducted a series of inspections, especially in places where German citizens who were part of Reiner's circle stayed. Electronic devices, closed-circuit recordings, and documentation were seized. A more intense search was also ordered, considering the possibility that the child might be found deceased. Some buildings were examined, and floors were lifted, but none of these efforts yielded results. The media covered the case, especially the differences of opinion between Juliet's father and his lawyer, Oscar, who announced in early June that he was stepping away from the case. According to him, his job was to find the truth, but his client's demands would not allow it. When asked about it, he added that Stefan's decision to side solely against Reiner went against his convictions. The lawyer took the opportunity to explain that, in his opinion, all the pieces of evidence pointed to both of them as responsible for the child's disappearance. Despite intense efforts, the lack of results from the various actions undertaken caused frustration among both the investigators and the child's grandparents. However, as time went on, and based on information contained in various seized devices during searches, detectives made discoveries that changed the course of the investigation. On July 23, the prosecution expanded the charges against Juliet's stepfather to include possession of child sexual content. In a press conference, the investigators revealed that, after analyzing 80,000 photographs contained in the seized electronic devices, they found adult material and intimate images of Juliet and her sister. According to the prosecutor, they had indications that the stepfather of the minors had captured the images. The established truth concept dictates that the person who took the photograph is considered the alleged perpetrator. This was articulated in the reasons for the charges against Reiner, as the images were found on his cell phone. Early the following year, the prosecutor in charge of the case declared that the investigation into Juliet's disappearance was getting closer to the truth. However, 2 months later, the case remained unsolved, and a decision by the main suspect came as a surprise. On March 17, 2021, The child's stepfather offered 350 million Paraguayan guaraníes, approximately $44,600 at the exchange rate of that time, for information about Juliet's whereabouts. Through the lawyers who made the announcement, Rayner insisted on his innocence and claimed that he or the kidnappers of the child could have entered the property through the rolling gate or from the neighboring property. On that occasion, he defended the mother of the missing child, who was also being held against her will, and criticized the justice system, stating that he never imagined that the truth could be suppressed for so long and that judges and prosecutors were trampling the law. The following month, just before entering a hearing to provide an interrogatory statement, the German man made statements pointing to Rufino, Juliet's grandfather, and urged journalists to investigate his partner's father. "If you want to investigate a bit, I'll give you a clue. Approach or ask Juliet's grandfather, who always says he knows more. And maybe he does know more than he says. And all I can tell you is that angels will become demons, and demons will become angels," he said. Rufino reacted to the accusations made by the main suspect in the case, stating that these accusations were part of a strategy by the lawyers. He also called on the prosecutors to follow him wherever they wanted and reiterated that his family was available for cooperation. In that context, he also mentioned that he had lost contact with his daughter months ago and emphasized that, in his opinion, she must know something about what happened to his granddaughter. While awaiting trial, an appeals court granted Lillian limited freedom of movement. On September 24, 2021, Lillian Zapata was sentenced to 6 years in prison for failing in her duty of care and abandonment of her daughter. Despite the guilty verdict, she remained free pending the confirmation of her sentence. In the case of Rayner, unlike his partner, he was acquitted of these same charges. The court believed that he had no involvement in the act of abandonment. However, he still faced charges related to the possession of sexual content involving minors. Only 2 months later, on November 9, Lillian was once again sentenced. She was given an additional 2 years of imprisonment with the suspension of the sentence's execution, after being found guilty of contempt of a court order. The November ruling came in response to her refusal to undergo a DNA test, which was intended to determine if the blood traces found during the investigations matched the child. She also rejected a toxicology test that aimed to determine if she consumed narcotics. "I don't know. The prosecution never informs me of anything. They never communicated with me. From jail, I did everything for them to investigate, even sent a letter to the French embassy. All I ask is that they search for and find my daughter." Lillian refused, arguing that it was her body, and she wouldn't give consent for the tests. Before the end of 2021, the court revoked the decision to keep Rayner in preventive detention. The verdict established that the public ministry did not find sufficient evidence to incriminate him, absolving him of all guilt and penalty. In an unexpected turn of events, a video posted on a popular social network on May 31, 2022, showed a girl on the streets of Ecuador who appeared to have the same characteristics as young Juliet. The recording was apparently made in public by 2 foreigners. When asked about it, officials from the public ministry confirmed that the girl in the video seemed to be Juliet, but provided no further details to protect the ongoing investigation. Nevertheless, it was announced that a technical verification of the content and origin was being conducted. This information led Stefan to request a copy of the Swiss documents to travel to Ecuador to verify if the girl in the video that circulated on social media was Juliet. His request led to an incident at the airport, during which his older daughter, after visiting her mother in Paraguay, was detained by airport authorities when she was about to return to Europe. It was reported that officials found her missing sister's documents among the girl's belongings. As a result, the girl missed her flight, but there were no other reported consequences. In a new chapter of this case, judge ordered the capture of Lillian, to enforce the prison sentence imposed in 2021 for the charges of violating her duty of care and abandonment. On August 16, 2023, Juliet's mother appeared before the court and requested the postponement of her imprisonment, invoking a provision in the Penal Code that allows the postponement of the sentence for mothers of children under 1 year old. However, on August 17, the court ruled against her request and ordered her immediate confinement at the National Women's Penitentiary, where she will serve her 6-year sentence. The judge mandated that her baby must receive pediatric care, social assistance, and all necessary care to ensure the well-being of the child and his mother during the breastfeeding stage. 3 years have passed since Juliet's disappearance, and many loose ends remain. One of the hypotheses being considered is that the girl disappeared on April 14, a day before the date the parents reported to the authorities, following an incident inside the house, and was subsequently moved to another location with the goats. To this day, it remains unconfirmed whether the blood found during the investigations belongs to Juliet, among other reasons due to the refusal of Lillian and the biological father to provide the necessary samples for DNA comparative studies. Nevertheless, Stefan remains vigilant for any progress in the investigations and has offered a reward for information leading to Juliet's whereabouts. Juliet's grandfather, Rufino, also refuses to give up. On several occasions, he has expressed his concern about the lack of results in the investigation and has requested the collaboration of the public to report any information or suspicions that could lead to Juliet's discovery. National authorities assure that the investigation is ongoing, and the police are following several leads. All that remains is to hope that the responsible party or parties for Juliet's disappearance confess, or that someone provides credible information that leads the authorities to the truth. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon. Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another Unreal True Crime. The horrible James Bulger case. The horrible James Bulger case. On February 12, 1993, a Friday afternoon in Bootle, England, specifically at the New Strand Shopping Centre, Denise was with a friend and her son, James Bulger. James had recently stopped using a stroller, as he was 2 years and 10 months old, so he was walking alongside his mother. At around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Denise's friend took a different path, leaving Denise alone with her little James. At one point, Denise went to a store with her son, bought what she needed, and when she realized it, she saw that James was not with her. It was only a momentary distraction for a few seconds as she checked her purse, but this oversight would change their lives forever. We all have memories of getting separated from family members in a shopping center as children, so the response here was quite common. When Denise left the store, she reunited with her friend, who had just passed by the front of the shop, but she didn't see James anywhere. They assumed he had wandered off, so they began asking the mall security guards and anyone they encountered if they had seen the child. Soon, announcements were made over the mall speakers, inquiring about James, and as desperation mounted, several police patrols combed the area until nightfall, yet there was still no sign of James. The next step for the police was to review the shopping center's security cameras, as it was their only hope of discovering what had happened that afternoon with James. It was 1993, and security cameras had limited resolution at that time, and this particular shopping center didn't have many of them. However, one camera happened to be pointed at the store. The footage showed James leaving through the door, and Denise' lapse in attention was indeed brief, as within a minute she could be seen searching for James at the door, but by then it was already too late. The next trace of James was captured by one of the overhead cameras, showing him following two individuals. What was unusual was that these two individuals appeared to be teenagers, seemingly between the ages of 14 and 18. In the final image of James, he was seen leaving the shopping center with one of these boys holding his hand. Initially, there was hope, with the court thinking that these young boys wouldn't be capable of harming little James. However, 2 days later, the truth would come to light. More than 4 kilometers away from the shopping center, while playing, some teenagers stumbled upon the remains of a child on the train tracks, who had apparently been struck by a train. This discovery immediately set off alarms, and they contacted one of James' uncles, who unmistakably identified the child as James Bulger. It was clear that this was no accident. In fact, all evidence suggested that James had died before being struck by the train. His body bore so many injuries that investigators couldn't determine the exact cause of his death. There were 2 more unsettling details. He had a pair of batteries in his mouth, and his left eye had been eerily painted blue. It was as if his young body had been subjected to inhumane experimentation, and the crime scene would remain etched in the memory of all the officers present as one of the most horrifying scenes they had ever encountered in their careers. The local community was in shock and outrage over the tragic incident. Many expressed their heartfelt condolences to the family, particularly Denise. While she had a momentary lapse of attention, it was a mistake anyone could make, and those with empathy could understand the immense pain she was going through. She replayed in her mind daily the haunting thought that she might have saved her son had she been more vigilant at that moment. In addition to the sympathy, there were some individuals, including her own husband at one point, who angrily confronted her and blamed her for not being attentive enough, asserting that the tragedy could have been prevented with more careful supervision. The potential key to identifying the culprit lay in the shopping center's security cameras, but their image quality was so poor that even determining the suspects' ages was impossible. Various media outlets attempted to enhance the images in hopes of identifying the individuals, but their efforts proved fruitless. The last glimmer of hope rested on someone coming forward to confess to the crime. On February 16, just 2 days after James' body was discovered, the police received a crucial call. The caller accused a 12-year-old boy named Jonathan Green of being the perpetrator, and shockingly, this accusation came from his own parents. They claimed that their son bore a resemblance to one of the suspects captured in the security camera footage, a grave accusation indeed when it comes from one's own parents. Law enforcement took this accusation seriously and subjected Jonathan to nearly 23 hours of relentless interrogation before eventually declaring him innocent. In a subsequent interview, Jonathan revealed the profound psychological trauma he endured during this time, spending countless sleepless nights. The intensity of the questioning even tempted him to falsely admit guilt at one point. The parents, however, did not hesitate much before making the accusation, even though the images they based it on were captured just days earlier. Furthermore, Jonathan was a mere 12 years old, and giving him the benefit of the doubt should have been a priority. The only evidence against him was a vague resemblance, which wasn't particularly strong given the poor image quality, akin to images taken through a blender. The media, driven by the pursuit of attention, without much consideration, broadcasted Jonathan as the prime suspect. This prompted people, fueled by a thirst for justice, to attack the vehicle in which he traveled with his parents and to vandalize their home by pelting it with stones until all the windows were shattered. The harassment was so severe that the Greens had to abandon their home and relocate to another city. Just 6 days after James' disappearance, a television program showed all available information about the case up to that date, hoping that a viewer might provide a clue to apprehend the culprits. The program was immensely popular at the time, and following its broadcast, the police received several calls, with one call standing out as particularly valuable. It came from a woman who firmly believed that the real culprits were Robert Thompson and John Venables. These boys were known for their mischievous behavior, which had escalated into criminal activities such as theft. They had gained a notorious reputation at their schools and were frequent truants. However, a significant conflict arose when the police suspected that the culprits were at least 14 years old, while these potential suspects were just 10 years old. Due to this discrepancy and the fact that there were several other suspects of similar age, the police decided to pay a visit to the homes of these young boys, although their expectations were not high. Initially, they observed some peculiar behavior, but it was challenging to draw definitive conclusions from these observations since the police had very little experience dealing with child offenders of this age. Subsequently, it was confirmed that both boys had skipped school on that particular day. Additionally, there was a noticeable detail. One of John's shoes displayed clear stains of blue paint. This piece of evidence led the authorities to consider them as prime suspects, and they were promptly taken to the police station. Unlike the previous case with Jonathan, this time the authorities handled it discreetly to prevent the young boys from enduring the extensive hours of questioning in a single session. Consequently, the interrogations were spread out over multiple days. The initial day of questioning proved to be challenging, given the boys' age of just 10, and the authorities couldn't subject them to the same scrutiny as adults. As a result, both boys steadfastly denied any involvement in the crime, and their age and emotional state played a significant role in this response. However, as the interrogations continued into the second day, a marked contrast emerged between Robert and John. Robert remained composed, displaying little emotion, not shedding a tear, and maintaining a stoic demeanor. On the other hand, John's emotional resilience began to waver, and he eventually confessed to the crime. John revealed that on that fateful afternoon, he and Robert had decided to skip school as they often did and ventured to the shopping center. Their initial actions upon arrival included stealing various items, among them a pair of batteries and a can of blue paint. Growing weary of their theft spree, a sinister idea took hold in their young minds. The idea of kidnapping a child. They planned to take the child onto the street and push them in front of an oncoming car. To execute this plan, they first signaled to another child to approach them. Fortunately, the child's vigilant mother intervened in time, preventing any harm. Continuing with their disturbing plan, as they passed by a butcher shop, they signaled to James Bulger through the window. Tragically, James responded to their call and left the shop, unbeknownst to his mother. The two boys quickly whisked James away from the shopping center to carry out their dark scheme. However, James, with his remarkable balance, made it challenging for them to push him far enough onto the road for a car to strike him. Undeterred, they decided to take James to a nearby canal, intending to push him in and drown him. Upon reaching the canal, they pushed him from above, but instead of falling into the water, James tumbled and struck his forehead, resulting in a visible bump. His cries for help filled the air. It is estimated that approximately 38 individuals witnessed these two boys with James, and a few inquired about their actions. Initially, one of the boys falsely claimed that they were brothers, which caused frustration among those who witnessed the incident. It is important to note that the onlookers faced a challenging situation involving children who appeared innocent, making intervention at the time more complex. However, What remains alarming and subject to criticism is the false explanation provided by John and Robert to one individual, stating that James was a lost child, and they were taking him to a police station. At that point, an adult had to be held accountable because this tragic incident could have been prevented. It's clearly irresponsible to entrust the care of a lost child to two 10-year-olds. After walking for more than 4 kilometers, the boys took James to a remote railway track, devoid of any witnesses, and carried out unspeakable acts that are too gruesome to detail. They utilized whatever items they could find, including bricks, stones, and even a hefty 10-kilogram metal bar, inflicting unimaginable suffering upon James. When he lay lifeless, their intentions were unclear, whether to stage it as an accident or to inflict further harm on this young life. They left his lifeless body on the railway track, concealed beneath debris, to remain unnoticed until a passing train. Even the police found it difficult to comprehend such a horrifying reality, and they believed that there must have been prior signs or indicators. Consequently, they decided to delve into the backgrounds of these two young boys. As the police investigation continued, it became evident that both boys had experienced remarkably similar childhoods. Robert Thompson resided in a dysfunctional household where he and his 6 siblings suffered constant abuse from their father. His mother grappled with severe alcohol-related issues and had once attempted suicide while setting their home on fire. Robert had earned a reputation as a thief, displaying violent tendencies and compulsive lying. John Venables, on the other hand, came from a fractured family where his parents were divorced, and he received minimal attention and affection. Coupled with his short temper, John often engaged in mischief and fights to garner attention, eventually leading to his expulsion from school. It's widely believed that Robert took on the role of the ringleader during their terrible actions. Throughout the interrogations, both boys attempted to shift blame onto each other. Robert, displaying a shrewd demeanor, would acknowledge his presence but claim that he left when he saw John beginning to torment James on the railway tracks. When confronted with questions that cornered him, he would feign tears without shedding a single drop. However, the presence of blood and strands of James' hair on his clothing, particularly his shoes, served as irrefutable evidence of his involvement. Consequently, on February 20, both were declared guilty, identified only as Boy A and Boy B to circumvent potential issues similar to those faced by Jonathan Green. It was known only that they were two 10-year-old boys residing in Walton. This case was a recipe for turmoil. The brutal murder of a child as innocent as a 2-year-old had shaken the community, evoking tears and profound anger. The sentiment was so intense that it practically condemned the perpetrators to a life in hiding if they ever ventured into the public sphere. Yet, these culprits were merely children of 10, making any sentencing decision the subject of heated controversy. There was a significant divide in public opinion regarding the appropriate punishment for John Venables and Robert Thompson. While some called for the death penalty, others believed that a regular prison sentence would suffice. The debate also centered around the issue of anonymity. Why should these boys be shielded from public exposure when other murderers were not afforded the same privilege? Revealing their real names would effectively have been a death sentence, erasing all the efforts invested in their psychological rehabilitation. However, some may argue that if they didn't afford James a chance to live, why should they be allowed to live freely? When the trial started, the parents of the accused were moved to different parts of the country and assumed new identities following death threats. The full trial opened at Sessions House, Preston, on 1 November 1993, conducted as an adult trial with the accused in the dock away from their parents, and the judge and court officials in legal regalia. The boys denied the charges of murder, abduction, and attempted abduction. James's mother, devastated by the loss of her son, could only muster the strength to attend the day of the verdict. It wasn't until the sentencing that the judge permitted the media to publish the faces of Robert and John, who had shown no remorse throughout the 17-day trial. The evidence presented indicated that both boys understood the difference between right and wrong. John's tears seemed to stem from the anticipation of their impending fate, while Robert remained emotionally detached. With this knowledge in mind, on November 24, 1993, John Venables and Robert Thompson, initially facing a minimum of 15 years in prison, received a different sentence. They were to be held in a juvenile detention center until they turned 18, avoiding a real prison experience. This decision disappointed the public to the extent that riots erupted, and vehicles believed to be carrying the boys were vandalized. However, these vehicles were decoys, and the boys were transported discreetly in other vehicles. From that point onward, they were granted new identities, shrouded in secrecy, known only to the authorities tasked with monitoring their lives. Initially, public outrage soared when news broke that the government had allocated £1.5 million, roughly equivalent to $2 million, for the rehabilitation of these young boys. This sparked a moral dilemma, as many argued that this substantial sum could have been better spent on saving innocent children, providing them with essential medications and sustenance. After all, this money came from hard-working taxpayers who weren't keen on supporting these boys financially. Some demanded a minimum prison sentence of 15 years for the young offenders, and this demand held some validity. Despite the expertise of psychologists, it's well established that by the age of 18, an individual's brain hasn't fully matured and latent issues may surface. Allowing potentially dangerous individuals to exit psychological support at this age was seen as a considerable risk. In June 2001, both boys were released, and their anonymity would only be lifted if they committed another crime. Interestingly, Robert, who initially appeared more problematic, managed to stay clear of criminal activity. On the contrary, John's behavior took a different turn, becoming a focal point for those questioning the efficacy of the system and how such individuals could be allowed to reintegrate into society. John's criminal history began with a brief jail sentence in 2008 for instigating a bar brawl and being found in possession of drugs. In 2010, he faced arrest for possessing indecent images related to child abuse. Subsequently, he was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison after confessing to downloading and disseminating such content online. Although he was released in 2013, he returned to jail in 2017 on the same charges. This time, he received a 40-month prison term after admitting to possessing over 1,000 explicit images. The exact details of his release and subsequent actions remain unclear, as authorities, seemingly regardless of his actions, continue to shield him from public scrutiny. Even 2 decades after the initial crime, John managed to claim another victim, 36-year-old Scott Bradley. Scott, a family man, fell prey to false rumors that he was, in fact, Robert Thompson. Over several months, he endured relentless harassment, insults, and threats directed at his family, and most importantly, his beloved son. During one phone call, he confided in his mother, expressing his unbearable distress and a desire to end his own life. Regrettably, she didn't take his words seriously, assuming the situation would eventually subside. Tragically, on August 10, 2012, Scott Bradley's mother discovered her son's lifeless body hanging from a noose. When authorities arrived at the scene, they determined it was a case of suicide. The mother of James Bulger, along with countless others, couldn't help but wonder if this tragedy might have been averted had the true identities of the original perpetrators been revealed. In late June 2019, it was reported that British officials had considered resettling Venables in Canada, Australia, or New Zealand due to the high costs behind protecting his anonymity. British authorities had reportedly spent £65,000 in legal fees to keep Venables' identity a secret. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Crime Analysis Central. See you soon. Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The case of the Kyoto Animation Studio massacre. On the morning of July 18, 2019, thousands of Japanese people in the city of Kyoto were surprised in the middle of their usual morning activities by a very unusual event. That morning, out of nowhere, the entire city could hear the sound of multiple ambulances and fire trucks racing through Kyoto with their sirens blaring, startling the entire population. Most Japanese who witnessed the massive mobilization of ambulances and patrols couldn't help but wonder what could be the cause of this, while simultaneously thinking that whatever it was, it had to be something serious because all these vehicles seemed to be heading to the same location, disregarding the usual heavy traffic in Kyoto mid-morning, causing all cars and bicycles on the road to give way to the authorities. By 11 a.m. on this summer morning, it became apparent to the population that indeed, all this professional equipment was heading to the same building. Emergency services had received multiple calls reporting an explosion heard around 10:30 in the morning, and the worst part was that the building was reported to be engulfed in flames. As the fire quickly spread throughout the first floor, most of the people inside couldn't escape the flames. This place was an office complex belonging to the company Kyoto Animation, an animation studio founded in 1981 that had produced various anime and manga novels of all kinds. Throughout its history, it has released great works that have captivated both Japanese and international audiences due to its high production standards. Alerted by the calls they had received, which evidenced the severity of the situation, the emergency services instructed all available personnel to arrive at the scene as quickly as possible. When they arrived at the building, the situation looked much worse than expected. Several neighbors who lived nearby were observing the scene from what they thought was a safe distance while they waited for the firefighters and paramedics. The scene of the fire was, to put it mildly, disheartening. The flames enveloped the entire building and leaped out of the windows, creating long tongues of fire that immediately hindered the efforts of the firefighters trying to contain the fire and rescue those who were still trapped inside what had become a deadly concrete trap. The police officers began to instruct the neighbors to move further away from the scene, as in many cases of fires and explosions, there was a significant possibility that the building could collapse. According to reports at the time, there were 73 company employees working there at the moment of the fire. From the moment they set foot on the street, the paramedics knew they had a lot of work to do, because even the employees who had managed to escape the offices were now at the foot of the burning building, seriously injured, some unable to move or unconscious. Most of them had suffered terrible injuries and cuts while trying to exit the building. The most terrible part was that most of them had severe third-degree burns. These are classified as such because they affect the deepest layers of the skin and require immediate medical attention, as they have a high risk of infection. Additionally, when a person has these burns in multiple parts of their body, or almost entirely, as was the case with some of these studio workers, the chances of losing their life are very high. For this reason, it was crucial that the workers receive timely treatment, So emergency doctors began to separate the injured according to the severity of their injuries in order to assist those who needed urgent medical help. This way, the most affected individuals began to be stabilized before being transported to the hospital by ambulance. At this point, the number of severely injured people was so high that more than 30 ambulances had to be mobilized in total to transport the victims of the supposed accident. It's important to clarify that the authorities believed before arriving at the scene that this was an accidental fire. However, what was happening just a block away from the scene would give a very drastic twist to this story. Just 100 meters from the burning building, some police officers from a nearby train station were detaining a man who had been chased there by Kyoto Animation employees. The man had serious burns on his face and various parts of his body. This raised several questions because why would the authorities subdue a man who appeared to be a victim of the fire? In addition to all this, multiple witnesses were reporting to the police officers present at the scene that they had seen a man enter the animation studio around 10:30 that morning with what appeared to be bottles of gasoline. So with this and the testimonies of the survivors of the tragedy who were conscious, the authorities understood that this was an arson attack and therefore a mass murder. When the firefighters were able to control the fire enough to enter the building and analyze the scene, they observed that the death toll of this tragedy had risen to 34 people. Shortly after, it would increase to 36, as 2 of the injured, suffering from the effects of their burns, could not endure any longer and lost their lives. The man was arrested, as the same employees who had pursued him claimed that he was responsible, and the same police officers who had arrested him during his transfer to the hospital testified that this man began shouting that yes, he was the one who had caused the fire at Kyoto Animation, justifying it by saying that everyone inside deserved to die because they had stolen his work without giving him any recognition. Once at the hospital, the first thing known was that the suspect's name was Shinji Aoba, and he was 41 years old. He had many injuries covering his entire body from the fire he allegedly caused. Once his wounds had healed enough for him to be kept in a cell without dying from an infection, a lengthy interrogation awaited him so that the entire country and the world would have an idea of what motivated him to commit such a horrible crime. Not much is known about this man's childhood, as his parents were born in a small village. Shinji's maternal grandfather was an honorable man who had taken on 2 jobs simultaneously to support his family. He mainly worked transporting goods by cart to Tokyo. He was considered a very kind and hardworking man, until one day he was diagnosed with advanced cancer and, unable to afford the treatment that would save him, he made the decision to take his own life to avoid burdening his family with the responsibility of helping him. Shinji's mother would meet the man who would become the father of her children during her adolescence. The problem arose because this man was almost 17 years older than her when they met, and it was known that he was married at the time. As a result, the woman's family strongly disapproved of their relationship, which is a very serious matter in Japan, as Japanese society places a significant emphasis on appearances. However, against all odds, she escaped from her parents' home, never to return. After running away, she started working in a factory near Kyoto, and eventually, she got married with the older man. The couple had 3 children, of whom there is only information available about Shinji and his sister. After leading what seemed to be a relatively normal life, it appears that Shinji's mother wanted some excitement and began an affair with a much younger man than her husband. When she was caught, she left home, leaving her husband, who earned a living as a taxi driver, completely alone and responsible for their 3 children. This continued to be the family's normal life until 1999, when a car accident left the father paralyzed. He was subsequently fired from the taxi company where he worked, leaving the man, who was already struggling to make ends meet, without the possibility of working to pay rent and provide food for his 3 children. Faced with this overwhelming pressure and distress, the man made the tragic decision to end it all. Despite all this, up to a certain point, Shinji had led a relatively normal life in his youth. Nothing out of the ordinary happened during his high school years, and he even worked part-time as a document clerk for the government. After graduating, Shinji continued to work part-time at a supermarket, and when he reached his 20s, he decided to move to another city. Everything seemed to be going relatively well until his mother's disappearance and his father's death, which slowly caused his life to crumble. The young man increasingly lacked motivation to move forward, and just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, life dealt him another blow. Shinji's sister, about whom little information is available, was almost at the point of losing hope. On that day, this woman visited a temple in the city, where she started talking to a priest about all the pain she had suffered in recent years. She then prayed for the repose of her father's soul before leaving the temple without saying a word. The next day after this visit, her lifeless body was found in a hostel near the temple she had visited, and she was determined to be the cause of her own tragic ending. After his sister's death, Shinji's life began to spiral downhill. His mental and economic problems led him to commit a robbery in 2012, where he managed to escape with around 20,000 yen in his bag. However, he was arrested shortly afterward and subsequently sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. Upon his release, Shinji became a complete social outcast. Nobody wanted anything to do with him. He had no family or friends, and he struggled to maintain any relationships due to his violent temper. This isolation led him to withdraw completely into his apartment. Like a significant portion of the Japanese population, Shinji loved manga and anime. Since childhood, he had dreamt of becoming a manga writer. Faced with a bleak future and difficulties finding employment, Shinji decided to pursue his dream. He began writing light novels and drawing manga panels. At this point, Shinji's story intersects with that of Kyoto Animation, a company with an excellent reputation not only in Japan, but also internationally. Kyoto Animation's specialty is depicting the wonders and dilemmas of everyday life. In other words, they create works with characters that look childlike or relatable, making it easy for viewers to connect with them quickly. However, they often incorporate plot twists that can leave you in tears. Every year, this animation company holds a manga and novel writing contest, where enthusiasts submit their works in the hopes of getting them published or adapted by the studio, or even turned into a big screen production. In 2018, Shinji submitted one of his novels for the contest, following all the specified steps. However, despite constantly checking his email for responses, he received no reply from the animation studio. As the days passed, 40-year-old Shinji felt that his hope of becoming a successful manga writer was slipping through his fingers. Several months later, on one of those afternoons when all Shinji did was watch anime and play video games, he started watching an anime produced by Kyoto Animation. The show told the story of high school students who were involved in long-distance shooting sports. That very afternoon, Shinji felt humiliated because he realized that his idea had been stolen. Yes, you heard it right. A giant studio worth millions of dollars had allegedly stolen his story, without giving him the slightest credit. Maybe they didn't steal his entire manga idea, but they had apparently lifted a scene directly from his work. Shinji was outraged because he believed that in the submission he had sent to Kyoto Animation, there was a rather inconsequential scene in which the anime's protagonists were in a supermarket buying discounted meat. According to him, this scene was identical to one in an episode of the show that had aired that week. The scene was quite generic and nothing out of the ordinary. However, likely due to his unstable mental state and isolation, Shinji couldn't stop obsessing over the idea that his idea had been stolen. He was filled with anger, wondering how they could have not even bothered to respond to his contest submission and had apparently taken advantage of his creativity without giving him the slightest credit. In reality, according to the studio, Shinji's novel submission had not passed the first elimination round conducted by the contest judges, which was why they hadn't bothered to contact him. Nevertheless, from the very beginning, Shinji demonstrated that he wasn't mentally well and acted on the belief that he had been personally attacked and blatantly robbed. All of this brings us to July 14, 2019, 4 days before the fire. 9 months earlier, Shinji had sent anonymous threats to Kyoto Animation, threatening them with death. Over 200 emails had been sent, and although employees had reported this to the police, nothing could be done because the emails were encrypted, and Shinji had waited for them to let their guard down. On that Sunday, a neighbor heard Shinji starting to hit the shared wall between their apartments. These two lived in apartments where every sound from the other side could be heard. Shinji, among them, used to be the noisiest, and they would occasionally bang on the walls to request silence from one another. However, this time, it turned out that the neighbor from the apartment above was moving, and consequently, they were the cause of the noise. The neighbor went to knock on Shinji's door, intending to explain that he wasn't the one making the noise, and to please stop banging on the wall. Before he had a chance to speak, Shinji angrily opened the door, grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, and yelled at him, "You're making too much noise. Shut up, or I'll kill you." Faced with this aggression, all of the neighbor's feelings turned to horror. From Shinji's demeanor, it was evident that he was perfectly capable of carrying out his threat. Without hesitation, he left the scene and called the police to report the assault. However, when the officers arrived at Shinji's apartment, he was already gone. It seems that this incident was the spark that would lead Shinji to commit his final act. The next day, Shinji took a bullet train to travel to Tokyo. He stayed in a hotel, and then, on Tuesday, headed to Kyoto, his final destination, where he stayed in another hotel. Several security cameras captured him in the areas near the animation studio. Several neighbors also remembered him clearly after the incident because Shinji wore the same red t-shirt and light jeans for all 4 days. Shinji spent several hours walking until he stopped at a store and bought a shopping cart. He then proceeded to a gas station where he bought 10 gallons of gasoline. With these supplies, Shinji stashed the cart and went to sleep, ready to carry out his evil plan early the next morning. On July 18, 2019, Shinji returned to the animation studio building around 10:30 in the morning, carrying his containers filled with gasoline. Upon entering, he blocked the 12 emergency exits and began to douse the studio with gasoline, taking advantage of the building's limited security, as such incidents are quite rare in Japan. Once everything was ready, Shinji struck a match, and everything started to burn. When the first people realized there was a fire, they attempted to escape through the emergency exits, but they were blocked. They ran towards the central exit where Shinji was present, still holding a gasoline container, and he began to douse the employees trying to escape while saying the word "die." This caused many people to run out into the street engulfed in flames. In just a moment, smoke had already reached the second floor of the building, and for those inside, it was too late to evacuate without suffering injuries. The building was completely engulfed in smoke in less than 2 minutes, making it difficult to breathe, and gradually, the animation studio workers began to lose consciousness due to the lack of oxygen. Most of the company's employees were on the top floor because the attack occurred during a meeting with executives from another company. It's unclear if Shinji planned this to claim more victims, but unfortunately, that day there were more people in the building than usual. To make matters worse, shortly after, an explosion rocked the building, causing the flames to burst through the windows and doors of the studio. The police believe that the combination of air and flames led to the explosion. As the fire grew, people inside the building tried to escape the flames. The majority of the victims, specifically 19 of them, were found on the third floor near the stairs leading to the emergency exit on the roof. These individuals unknowingly ended up on this staircase, which acted like an oven. After causing this hellish scene, Shinji accidentally set himself on fire with the same gasoline he had used to try to burn his victims. This led him to flee the scene, but an employee of Kyoto Animation did not accept this and started to chase him. Eventually, they all ended up at a train station located 100 meters from where Shinji was finally apprehended by 2 police officers from the same station. The fire was completely extinguished after 5 hours of immense efforts by the police and firefighters. It was at this point that the authorities were able to accurately count the victims of the incident. In this attack, 36 people lost their lives, while another 34 were left with serious injuries. Of the deceased, 28 died from carbon monoxide poisoning, 6 succumbed to their burns, and 2 passed away while receiving medical treatment at the hospital. It was reported that 2/3 of the fatal victims who worked at the studio were women, as Kyoto Animation was known for hiring women in almost all of its animation positions. After spending 10 months in the hospital, Shinji was officially arrested and processed. There were concerns about his physical health, and questions arose as to whether he would be physically capable of enduring the lengthy trial schedule ahead of him. His hospital treatment had taken so long because he had suffered burns on 90% of his body. In such cases, skin donors are crucial, but the Japanese authorities correctly prioritized obtaining donors for the victims. As for Shinji, he had no other option but to accept artificial skin, becoming the first person to undergo such a significant surgery of this kind without using real skin transplants. The judicial processes in Japan are known to be slow, as they usually involve multiple stages before a clear conviction is obtained. Since the trials for Shinji began, he underwent numerous psychiatric and psychological evaluations to determine if he was mentally healthy at the time of the crime. The results were somewhat mixed because, on one hand, it was clear that Shinji's brain did not function normally, but on the other hand, he was aware of what he was doing, making it difficult to predict what sentence he would receive. The decision had to be something between the death penalty and life imprisonment. The world was deeply affected by this crime, especially the animation industry. After the fire, an American anime licensor launched a successful GoFundMe campaign with a goal of $750,000 to assist the studio and the victims' families. In less than 24 hours, they raised over $1 million for this purpose. Even the then Prime Minister of Japan expressed condolences to the families, a figure many may recognize as he was assassinated a couple of years later. The president of Kyoto Animation mentioned that he did not plan to rebuild the studio in the same location, as it would be traumatic and bring bad memories for the employees. Instead, he considered demolishing the remains of the studio to create a park with a monument dedicated to the staff and the local community. Today, most of Kyoto Animation's employees have returned to work, this time in the company's second studio. One of these employees is a veteran manga artist who has been working at Kyoto Animation since the 1980s. He returned to work after the incident, having recovered from the injuries he sustained. He mentioned that he feels better when he is working than resting. He also expressed his intention to make his future work a tribute to those who perished. Another significant detail worth mentioning is that as a result of this tragedy, Japan decided to implement a new law. It requires citizens to present identification and provide reasons for their gasoline purchases when buying it in lighters or containers. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon. Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The case of Marianne Bachmeier. Marianne Bachmeier was born on June 3, 1950, in Sarstedt, West Germany. Her family ended up there following the public persecution and scrutiny her father faced for being a former official of the German National Socialist Party. During World War II, he was a member of the notorious SS. As a result, Marianne was raised in a very conservative home by deeply religious tutors. It's said that she never had a happy childhood due to a lack of close relationship with her parents. Her father was authoritarian, abusive, and an alcoholic, often spending more time at a bar near their home than with his family. Marianne's mother was also distant, rarely speaking or spending time with her daughter. The situation worsened due to her father's drinking, which increased his aggression towards the family. This ended with the parents' divorce and the father leaving the house. Marianne thought she could finally be free and happy, but soon her mother remarried another abusive man. Unfortunately, instead of Marianne and her mother uniting against the man, they both turned against Marianne, blaming her for the family's problems. This broke their relationship, and Marianne, seen as a troublesome teenager, was eventually kicked out of the house. During her adolescence, Marianne faced multiple assaults from different men, leading to the birth of her first child at just 16. She was forced to give the baby up for adoption due to lack of resources and because the baby's father abandoned her. 2 years later, Marianne got pregnant again by her then abusive boyfriend. Despite the circumstances, she wanted to keep the baby, but before the child's birth, she experienced another traumatic assault at a nightclub. Her boyfriend left her, and she gave up this second child for adoption as well. Later, Marianne dropped out of school and sought work to support herself. She started working at a bar named Tipasa, where she met the manager, and after some time, they became a couple. At 22, she became pregnant with her third child and felt ready to raise the baby with some resources and a home. However, her then boyfriend disagreed with her decision, ending their relationship. Marianne, firm in her choice, decided to raise her daughter Anna alone, despite her parents' demands to give her up for adoption like her previous children. After Anna's birth, Marianne vowed to be a good mother and underwent a tubal ligation, a common practice at the time to prevent overpopulation. Marianne and Anna lived together in Lübeck, Germany, and despite challenges, they made it through. Indeed, Marianne was happy because her daughter was the only person in her life who did not intend to harm her, unlike her parents or ex-partners. However, raising Anna alone meant Marianne had to take her to work at the bar, so she could only attend to her daughter during her few breaks. Years later, people close to Marianne would say that she treated Anna like a little adult and expected her to take care of many things on her own from a young age. Anna often slept in the bar while Marianne was working, and a friend described Anna as a very vibrant and creative child who unfortunately never had a pleasant family life, as she only occasionally saw her father at the bar. Some stories also mention that Marianne worked late into the night and then slept all day, leaving her 7-year-old daughter alone for much of the day. Anna used this time to play around the neighborhood alone, greeting people and playing with their pets. It was even mentioned that Marianne was aware of her problematic lifestyle and sometimes contemplated the idea of giving Anna up for adoption. This leads us to May 5, 1980, where it is unclear exactly what happened that morning between Anna and Marianne. Some say they argued because Anna woke up in a bad mood and stubbornly did not want to go to school but wanted to play in the park, which Marianne did not allow. There's another version where Anna asked permission from her mother to skip school to play in the park with friends, and Marianne eventually let her go, not suspecting her daughter's real intentions to play elsewhere. Regardless, Anna was playing outside when the ensuing events turned into a tragedy in Marianne's life. When Marianne returned home later that day, she found it strange not to find her daughter anywhere but decided to wait a few more hours for her return. As time passed and Anna did not return, Marianne started searching the neighborhood. She asked Anna's friends and locals if they knew anything about her daughter, but nobody knew anything. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. So Marianne reported this anomaly to the police. The next day, a very upset and nervous woman arrived at the police. It seemed that this man, Klaus Grabowski, 35 years old, was overcome with guilt after the act and couldn't find peace. He ended up confessing in detail what happened to his girlfriend. This caused a great argument, after which he left, confused, to go to a bar for a beer. His girlfriend took this opportunity to go to the police station to report him. The truth was that Anna had been abducted by Klaus, who owned a butcher shop near Marianne's house. Anna had gone there intending to play because the man had promised her that she could play with his cats whenever she wanted to visit. Innocently, Anna went and rang the doorbell. Klaus received her and kept her in his house for several hours, assaulting her multiple times until finally, to prevent the child from confessing the facts, he ended her life by suffocation with a pair of his girlfriend's stockings. Klaus Grabowski had a history of criminal activities and had previously been convicted for the assault of 2 young girls. He was known to have a troubled past. In 1973, he attacked a 6-year-old girl and was charged with attempted murder. 2 years later, he faced charges for these crimes, leading to a psychological evaluation. The results indicated he had an abnormal sexual instinct and significantly limited capacity to control it. Consequently, he was sent to a psychological treatment center instead of prison. A few years later, Klaus was offered the option of undergoing a controversial chemical castration procedure in exchange for early release, which he readily accepted. This procedure involved administering drugs to reduce libido and testosterone levels, reducing the likelihood of reoffending. Klaus preferred this option over returning to a mental health facility. It was a common practice for offenders of such crimes, often resulting in reduced sentences under the assumption that they no longer posed a societal threat. Despite the reversibility of this procedure, Klaus was released soon after undergoing it, without subsequent psychological evaluations. 2 years later, he underwent hormonal treatment to reverse the chemical castration, increasing his testosterone levels. This treatment was approved by the court under the pretext that he wanted to start a family with his girlfriend and lead a normal life, thus misleading everyone about his true nature. On the day of the incident, authorities quickly headed to Klaus's residence, but couldn't find him. He had taken Anna's body and left a note for his girlfriend, asking her to meet him at a bar that night to discuss the situation. The police took this opportunity to wait for Klaus at the bar and arrested him upon his arrival. After his arrest, Klaus claimed he had no intention of inappropriately touching Anna. He despicably defended himself by alleging that the child tried to seduce and extort him, and fear of returning to jail drove him to end her life. He claimed Anna had threatened to tell her mother he had inappropriately touched her, a claim he insisted was false and made with the intent to extort money from him. Klaus revealed he had hidden the body in a cardboard box near a canal. When the police informed Marianne about her daughter's whereabouts and tragic demise, she was devastated. However, the trial brought further anguish. Marianne was forced to hear testimonies and descriptions about her life and Anna's, suggesting that Anna was practically raised on the streets and that such an incident was inevitable due to Marianne's negligence as a bar waitress who worked late nights and neglected her daughter. This left Marianne heartbroken and furious, particularly tormented by the possibility that Anna's killer might not receive the maximum penalty due to potential claims of mental health issues, which could allow him to avoid prison. Consequently, Marianne silently began to devise a plan to avenge her daughter's death, regardless of the consequences. During the trial, Klaus Grabowski repeatedly claimed that Anna had seduced and extorted him for money, insisting that his actions were driven by the fear of returning to jail. His defense also centered around the idea that the hormonal treatment he was undergoing significantly affected him and led to violent outbursts. Frustrated and injured by these lies, Marianne decided to buy a gun and secretly practice shooting. Every time Marianne attended the trial, her displeasure was evident, especially when she heard statements that defamed her 7-year-old daughter. At one point, she expressed clear anger, unable to bear listening to Klaus and his lawyer's fabrications. However, the trial took a dramatic turn on its third day, March 6, 1981. Marianne arrived at the courtroom later than usual, entering with an expressionless face. She walked with an upright posture, her hands in the pockets of her white coat. Unbeknownst to others, she had managed to bypass the strict security measures of the judicial establishment with a pistol in her pocket. As the judge and others in the courtroom carried on with the proceedings, Klaus, with his back to Marianne, faced the judge. At this moment, Marianne stood still, her nerves palpable. She seized the opportunity to act when Klaus stood up to give his statement. Marianne pulled out the pistol and fired 7 shots, 6 of which struck Klaus, causing him to collapse. The precision of her shots was noted by many. Marianne remained expressionless throughout, slightly moving her lips as she fired. She made no attempt to flee and did not resist when the courtroom security detained her. Marianne was heard saying, "That pig killed my daughter. He shot her in the face, but I shot him in the back. I hope he's dead." Her wish was confirmed when an officer checked Klaus and declared him dead. Upon hearing this, a look of relief crossed Marianne's face, contrasting her previous expressions. However, Marianne now faced her own trial, which would not be easy to escape. Those who witnessed the incident noted that Marianne seemed to be in a trance, struggling to comprehend her actions. The forensic psychiatrist examined her, asking her to write something to analyze her handwriting and mental state. Marianne wrote, "I did it for Anna," surrounding the sentence with 7 hearts, possibly representing each year of Anna's life. The next day, German newspapers displayed Marianne's photo, dubbing her the Avenging Mother. The case became the most well-known instance of vigilante justice in West Germany, garnering extensive media coverage. Television crews from across Europe rushed to report on the case, highlighting its extraordinary and tragic nature. Marianne was quickly brought to trial for murder. During her trial, she testified that she was not fully aware of her actions, claiming she was in a trance and even had a dream where she saw Anna walking through the courtrooms. She also mentioned her mental health had deteriorated significantly following the events. Marianne then told a lie that likely worsened her standing with the judge. She claimed she had bought the gun to end her own life, but no one believed she hadn't premeditated her actions and practiced with the weapon before using it in court. Many people in Germany and around the world supported Marianne for taking matters into her own hands, as they felt the system had failed by previously freeing Klaus and authorizing his hormonal treatment without proper evaluation. They saw it as fair to set her free. However, there were also those who viewed Marianne as a criminal who had taken justice into her own hands in the worst possible way, labeling her a murderer. Others judged her for being an irresponsible mother who had given up her other 2 children for adoption and committed a cold-blooded crime that could have harmed others in the process. With all this controversy and mixed feelings, Marianne was charged with murder in a judicial process for the death of Klaus Grabowski on November 2, 1982. The prosecution later withdrew the charge, and after 28 days of negotiations, the jury reached a verdict. In March 1983, Marianne was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and illegal possession of a firearm, sentenced to 6 years in prison. 3 years later, the authorities reconsidered, believing she didn't deserve any sentence. Soon after, Marianne sold her life story for about 250,000 German marks in an exclusive to a news magazine, stating she did it to pay off the debts caused by the judicial process. Following the fall of the Berlin Wall, she returned to a now unified Germany after being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. During this time, Marianne was interviewed by various media outlets, often placed in tense situations with questions comparing her to Klaus, as both were murderers. Despite this, she maintained her composure, stating she did what she did to ensure Klaus faced justice for his actions against the 7-year-old girl, even as he continued to spread lies about her in his final moments. Knowing her illness was terminal, Marianne asked a reporter to accompany her with a movie camera until her last moments. Marianne passed away at the age of 46 on September 17, 1996, from pancreatic cancer. She was buried next to her daughter Anna's grave in the Lübeck Cemetery. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon. The horrible case of Oakley Carlson. Oakley Carlson's journey began on December 6, 2016, in Oakville, Washington, but her upbringing was far from ordinary. She came from a family facing numerous challenges. Her parents, Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carson, had their fair share of troubles. Andrew had a brief stint as a police officer, but got dismissed due to misconduct, although it didn't lead to any criminal charges. On the other hand, Jordan had a history marked by serious drug and theft-related offenses, and both grappled with substance abuse. Their family had been under scrutiny since 2013 due to various complaints about how they were raising their children. In August 2017, Jordan initiated a crowdfunding campaign in a bid to gather support for hiring a lawyer. Child Protective Services had taken custody of their children following a report that they weren't providing proper medical care to one of their daughters, who had health issues affecting her growth and weight. During that same period, 8-month-old Oakley found herself in the care of Eric and Jamie Jo Hiles. The Hiles were caring school teachers who had a deep longing to become parents. Their journey to become Oakley's foster parents began when a former student of theirs informed them that the granddaughter of his hairdresser needed a foster home and would eventually be put up for adoption. He suggested that they offer a loving home, and they wholeheartedly agreed. As Oakley grew, she blossomed into a joyful child who loved to bring smiles to everyone around her. Her passion for dancing led to her enrollment in dance classes. She also possessed an extraordinary ability to memorize stories and was exceptionally bright, radiating love in the Hiles home. Jamie and Eric were always honest with Oakley, explaining that although she didn't come from Jamie's belly, she came from her heart. The couple cherished her deeply and had dreams of adopting her. However, in October 2019, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families made the difficult decision that Oakley should return to live with her biological family. Despite the Hiles' concerns, in November 2019, just a week shy of her 3rd birthday, Oakley bid farewell to Jamie and Eric, Returning to live with Jordan, Andrew, and her siblings, Jamie later shared in an interview the heart-wrenching experience of letting go of Oakley on the day before Thanksgiving dinner. It was a tearful farewell, filled with uncertainty about whether they'd ever have the chance to see her again. They remained vigilant about Oakley's well-being, as they had lingering concerns about Jordan and Andrew's ability to care for and protect her. Regrettably, the concerns of Oakley's foster parents were not unfounded. In 2020, Oakley spent Christmas with her paternal grandparents, who were deeply alarmed by her condition. She had developed noticeable dark circles under her eyes, had sores on her face, and appeared pale and bruised. Worried for her safety and well-being, the grandparents reached out to Child Protective Services, but it seemed that their report only ignited a significant family dispute. Following that disturbing incident, Andrew's parents had no further contact with Oakley or her parents. Nearly a year later, on November 6, 2021, just before 5 p.m., Andrew contacted the authorities to report a house fire that had occurred earlier that same day. According to his account, Oakley accidentally set the sofa on fire while playing with a lighter. Andrew explained that he and his wife had battled the flames for 4 hours, but despite their best efforts, the fire had spread to the second floor of their home. This raised eyebrows among the firefighters, primarily due to the considerable delay between the start of the fire and its reporting. Andrew attributed the delay to the chaotic situation, as neither he nor his wife could locate their cell phones to call for assistance. Given the inconsistencies in the information provided, officials launched a thorough investigation into the incident. Their findings revealed that the fire had actually originated in the microwave, contradicting the initial report of the sofa being the source of the blaze. In the aftermath of the fire, a close family friend organized an online fundraiser, explaining that the fire had devastated the upper part of their house, resulting in the loss of most of their belongings. Several days later, Jessica, the local school director, whose daughter was friends with one of the Carlson girls, decided to visit the family. They were staying at an inn at the time, and she aimed to deliver supplies and offer support. Upon her arrival, she immediately noticed Oakley's absence and inquired about her whereabouts. She was informed that Oakley was grounded. Subsequently, she sent a school colleague to make another supply delivery, but this visit lasted only 5 minutes. The colleague became increasingly concerned that Oakley was not present with her siblings on that day. Growing ever more alarmed about the perplexing absence of the child, Jessica seized an opportunity during a visit from Oakley's younger sister, who was spending the night at her place, to gently inquire about Oakley's whereabouts. To her shock, the 6-year-old girl responded with visible irritation, stating that Oakley no longer existed and had been taken in by her adoptive parents. This startling revelation prompted Jessica to take immediate action. She promptly contacted the County Child Protective Services office, expressing her deep concern about Oakley's safety and requesting a welfare check to ensure the child's well-being. On December 6, 2021, authorities conducted a visit to the hotel where Oakley's family had been staying after the fire, with the aim of assessing the situation regarding the missing child. Jordan greeted them at the door, holding a 2-year-old child in her arms, and indicated that the family was in the process of packing up. The ensuing conversation was fraught with unsettling signs. When questioned about Oakley's whereabouts, Jordan responded that Oakley was with her foster mother. The officer pressed her to confirm if she was indeed the child's mother, to which she affirmed. However, when asked again about her daughter's location, Jordan's response was to turn around and seek confirmation from someone else in the room if the child was with her foster parents. At this juncture, the officer beckoned Andrew closer to the entrance and posed the same question about his daughter's whereabouts. He replied that Oakley was with his parents, referring to the child's grandparents, but admitted he did not have their address or phone number. Eventually, he provided this crucial information to the police. According to official records, the officers reached out to Andrew's father, who disclosed that they had not seen their granddaughter since December 2020 when she had spent Christmas with them. Subsequently, authorities visited the grandparents' residence in person, confirming that the child was indeed not with them. Realizing their investigative options narrowing, they contacted social services personnel to inquire if the child was in foster care. However, according to the officials, the child should have been with her biological parents. Upon returning to the Carlsons' hotel room, the officials informed Andrew that the child was not with her grandparents. Rather than displaying concern, he appeared oddly indifferent, as if he had prior knowledge of the information they had just conveyed. Jordan's reaction, while different, was equally perplexing. She erupted in anger, tightly clenched her fists, and declared her refusal to answer their questions before promptly retreating to the room. For the authorities, it was becoming increasingly apparent that the Carlsons were harboring something. Adding to their concerns was a peculiar observation made regarding the family's vehicle parked at the hotel. There was only one child safety seat, despite the fact that they were supposed to have 4 children, all under the age of 10. On the same day, around 2:00 p.m., Jessica, the school director, contacted the police to report an unusual incident. Jordan had called the school during regular school hours, citing an emergency and expressing the need to pick up her 6-year-old daughter. Acting on the cautionary side, the authorities promptly instructed the school not to release the child to her parents. However, the warning turned out to be unnecessary, as Jordan and Andrew failed to show up at the school. Approximately an hour and a half after the call, 32-year-old Jordan and 36-year-old Andrew departed the hotel with their 2-year-old child, but their departure did not go unnoticed. Both of them were arrested for obstruction as they adamantly refused to cooperate with the ongoing investigation. Simultaneously, on the same day, the police made a public appeal on social media, seeking assistance from the community to help locate Oakley. According to a report from a local newspaper, this marked a turning point as Child Protective Services assumed custody of the 2- and 6-year-old children. As for the 9-year-old, the identity of the guardian who assumed custody remained undisclosed. The family's residence and property underwent a thorough examination, with detectives from the county police and the FBI working together. Despite their meticulous search of the house, they found no sign of the missing girl or any evidence suggesting she had been living there recently. What stood out was that while all her siblings had designated bedrooms, there was no indication of a room for Oakley, and her clothing and toys were noticeably absent. A significant discovery for the ongoing investigation was the presence of bloodstains on the blinds, the front door, and a handprint on one of the walls. On December 6, Andrew and Jordan found themselves in the county jail, each with a bond set at $150,000 and a 72-hour hold, all due to suspicions of involuntary manslaughter. However, as the investigations progressed, additional charges were brought against them in the following days. They now faced allegations of second-degree abandonment of a dependent person. This new charge stemmed from the authorities' discovery that, for approximately 15 months, the couple had failed to provide their 6-year-old daughter with the prescribed medical treatment, resulting in a severe decline in her health that posed a risk of death. The police clarified that this was the sole charge that would keep them detained, and the bond remained in effect. Oakley's paternal grandparents issued a statement, emphasizing their full cooperation with the investigation and their singular objective: to locate their missing granddaughter. They also shared their prayers for the child's safe return and expressed gratitude for all those diligently working to find her. On December 13 of the same year, the search efforts officially concluded. Law enforcement authorities reported extensive searches that covered over 300 acres, scouring for any trace of the vanished child. The police affirmed that every inch of land had been meticulously examined, leaving no stone unturned. However, he underlined that the quest for truth regarding the fate of the little girl was far from over. Despite the parents' claims of having seen the child as recently as November 30, they were unable to provide any concrete information about her whereabouts or her current condition. Their inability to confirm whether the child was under the care of an adult further compounded the mystery. Yet, considering all the gathered evidence, detectives established a troubling timeline. Oakley had not been seen alive since January 27, 2021. It led them to a grim conclusion that the child couldn't possibly have survived on her own for such an extended period. Given these revelations, authorities issued a heartfelt plea to anyone who may have come into contact with Oakley since January 2021 or had interactions with her parents during that time to step forward with any information they might possess. Furthermore, court documents unveiled disturbing testimonies from Oakley's own siblings, who held the grim belief that their sister was no longer among the living. The eldest among them disclosed that their mother had strictly forbidden any discussion about Oakley. They recounted a tragic narrative in which Oakley had supposedly accidentally started a house fire using their mother's lighter, leading to physical abuse and her confinement in a cell beneath the stairs as a form of punishment. Their mother had allegedly told them that Oakley had ventured into the woods and met a tragic fate at the jaws of wolves. Another sibling recalled incidents where Jordan had used a belt to discipline Oakley and had locked her in a closet, expressing deep concerns about their sister's well-being and a haunting fear that she might have succumbed to starvation. Based on the available information, authorities were unable to determine whether Oakley was still alive before the house fire. It's worth noting that legal documents revealed a troubling history. Since 2013, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families had received a total of 11 records related to the Carlsons. Among these, 8 were closely examined in light of allegations involving domestic violence, physical abuse, parental drug use, and medical neglect. In February 2022, a significant development unfolded in the case against Jordan and Andrew. This time, they faced fresh charges for endangering their children by exposing them to a controlled substance. This shocking turn of events stemmed from the alarming discovery of dangerously high levels of methamphetamine in the bodies of 2 of their children. A month later, on March 14, it was reported in the media that Andrew had pleaded guilty to separate charges of endangering 2 of his children with drugs. Unfortunately, his guilty plea did not yield any information that could shed light on the circumstances surrounding Oakley's disappearance. It was also announced at that time that Andrew would face sentencing at the end of March, with the maximum penalty being 12 months of imprisonment. In response to these developments, concerned citizens gathered near County Jail, demanding that the Carlsons reveal the fate of their daughter. The protesters raised their voices, labeling Jordan as a monster rather than a mother. Among the demonstrators stood Oakley's foster mother, who expressed her dissatisfaction with the potential 1-year sentence for the biological father, emphasizing that the children's trauma would extend far beyond that period. As planned, Andrew's sentencing hearing unfolded on March 28, conducted through a video call. The judge delivered a 12-month sentence for endangering the minors. While pronouncing the verdict, the judge directed her words toward the defendant, highlighting the fundamental duty of a parent to protect their children, a duty he had evidently failed to fulfill. Moreover, the judge imposed several restrictions on Andrew. These restrictions included a prohibition on consuming controlled substances. Additionally, he was mandated to undergo a chemical dependency assessment within 45 days of his release, follow a recommended treatment, and provide proof of compliance to the court for the subsequent 6 months following his release from prison. In early April 2022, shortly after Andrew's sentencing, Jordan also entered a guilty plea. She admitted guilt on the 2 charges of exposing her children to contact with a controlled substance. Consequently, on April 22, she received a 20-month prison sentence. Moreover, she was subject to a restriction that prevented her from having any contact with minors under the age of 18 without proper supervision. However, in January 2023, shortly after her release following her sentence related to 2 of her children, Jordan faced legal issues once again. This time, she was arrested for fraud and identity theft. Authorities revealed that she had fraudulently acquired 4 credit cards using personal information from friends and family. Interestingly, 3 of these illicitly obtained cards were discovered obstructing a toilet in the hotel room where the couple had stayed following their house fire. It was also disclosed that Jordan had spent over $40,000 using these cards, making purchases at Walmart and eBay, and even withdrawing cash for gambling at a casino. Jordan eventually reached a guilty plea agreement. Initially facing a 36-month sentence, the judge, exercising discretion, decided to impose a longer sentence. Consequently, Jordan was sentenced to 43 months in jail. Meanwhile, Oakley's foster parents have remained actively engaged in their relentless search for the missing child. They have continued to express their frustration and heartache, maintaining that the decision to return the girl to her biological parents was made hastily and put the child's well-being at risk, given that Andrew and Jordan were deemed unfit, both mentally and physically, to care for her. Oakley's disappearance had a profound impact on the public, evoking significant interest and empathy. The local community not only cooperated with law enforcement, but also assembled in front of the county courthouse on multiple occasions, demanding justice. Additionally, an online petition was launched in December 2021, amassing over 7,000 signatures. The petition sought to advocate for a support system aimed at safeguarding children who were returning to their families after exiting the foster care system. It also called for mandatory long-term drug testing for families reuniting with their children. This petition eventually evolved into a bill known as the Oakley Law. While it was reported in February 2023 that the bill had encountered obstacles in the Washington state legislature, it did prompt responses from representatives of the Department of Children, Youth, and Families in the state. These officials agreed to engage in discussions regarding policy and budget options, indicating the continued effort to address critical child welfare issues. The fate of Oakley remains shrouded in mystery, presenting a perplexing puzzle for investigators. Their most plausible scenario suggests that the young girl may have tragically lost her life. However, since her disappearance, an unsettling hypothesis has emerged that Jordan might have sold her. The investigation has grappled with an inundation of leads, which has proven to be one of its most challenging aspects from the very outset. The county police has been inundated with reports from all over the country, each suggesting potential sightings of the missing girl. They've diligently collaborated with law enforcement agencies across the United States, meticulously examining every lead. Regrettably, none of these leads has yielded any information about Oakley's whereabouts. Another formidable hurdle faced by investigators was the absence of a clear timeline pinpointing when the girl disappeared. To construct a timeline, they had to painstakingly piece together who had interacted with Jordan, Andrew, and Oakley in the months leading up to her disappearance. This endeavor involved tracking down family members, school personnel, and scoring surveillance footage from various stores. The investigators acknowledged that it would have been relatively straightforward if they were dealing with a family or a group of people who adhered to a consistent, predictable routine. However, in this case, the family's movements were marked by unpredictability. As of the conclusion of this investigation, Oakley's parents had not provided any information concerning the child's fate, and both continued to be regarded as suspects in her disappearance. The investigations remains active and ongoing. In their relentless quest for clues, the police has extended an $85,000 reward. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon. Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another Unreal True Crime. The Juan Fernando Hermosa case. Juan Fernando Hermosa Suarez came into the world on February 28, 1976, amidst the picturesque province of Sucumbíos in Ecuador. His early life was shrouded in mystery, with no concrete information about his biological father and his mother, a humble laundry worker, struggling to provide for him. Consequently, when Juan was just a year old, destiny intervened, leading to his adoption by Rafael Hermosa and Zoila Suarez, a compassionate couple longing for children. They resided in a small and tranquil city in Ecuador until 1982, when a significant change transpired. Rafael sold their farm, and the family relocated to Quito, the vibrant capital of Ecuador. Initially, Juan's life appeared to follow a typical trajectory. He experienced the ups and downs of childhood, marked by occasional erratic moods. However, a pivotal moment occurred when he was around 7 years old. A young girl named Gloria entered the Hermosa family's life, altering its course. Gloria, at the tender age of 14, unveiled a startling revelation. She was Juan's sister. Gloria sought refuge with the Hermosa family, as her stepfather had cast her aside. Rafael and Zoila, known for their compassion, welcomed Gloria into their home. As time passed, Gloria found herself alone with Juan and chose to share a life-altering secret. Juan was adopted. This revelation, delivered without much consideration for his age and emotional readiness, left Juan grappling with profound questions. Gloria's presence also brought strife into the household, as she frequently disparaged Rafael and Zoila to Juan. Her tales included speculations about theft and flight from their home. Gloria's turbulent and disruptive behavior made it difficult for her to coexist with the Hermosa family, and she soon moved on. Juan's response to this revelation was tumultuous. As he mustered the courage to confront his adoptive parents, tears welled up in his eyes. He posed the painful question of whether it was true that Rafael and Zoila were not his biological parents. Faced with the heart-wrenching truth, they had no choice but to share the details of Juan's adoption. Some people have the notion that criminal behavior can be attributed solely to the influence of one's upbringing. In this case, Juan's adoptive parents, though imperfect, made sincere efforts to guide him down the right path. Nevertheless, it became increasingly evident that Juan's trajectory was far from conventional. Juan's journey took a tumultuous turn as he spiraled into rebellion. Crossing the boundary of typical childhood behavior at the tender age of 9. It was during these formative years that he began a disturbing pattern of animal cruelty, primarily targeting cats. He would macabrely bring their lifeless remains to school, seeking to shock and garner attention. Unsurprisingly, these actions resulted in multiple expulsions from school. In an attempt to curb his unruly behavior, Rafael, his adoptive father, resorted to occasional corporal punishment. Yet his discipline never escalated to a level that could be deemed excessive. In fact, it was evident that Juan did not hold any lingering grudges against Rafael or Zoila, his adoptive mother. Rafael's work commitments frequently led him to travel, leaving Juan with more unsupervised time. Although Zoila provided some company, Her hearing impairment and struggles with arthritis prevented her from being a constant presence. Consequently, Juan found himself increasingly isolated. Completing elementary school at the age of 12 was a significant accomplishment for Juan, given his penchant for petty theft. He had already embarked on a path of pilfering, selling whatever items he could lay his hands on. Remarkably, his criminal endeavors thus far had entailed relatively low levels of risk. However, at the age of 13, Juan became embroiled in a reckless car theft escapade alongside older boys. Assuming the role of a passenger, they initially evaded capture. Their audacious greed, however, led them to steal yet another vehicle, resulting in their apprehension. Juan's subsequent placement in a juvenile correctional facility underscored the urgent need for reform within these institutions. In the majority of cases, these facilities only serve to further entrench delinquent behavior, treating these young individuals as hardened criminals. The meager mental assistance provided took the form of disconnected lectures, falling short of addressing their unique needs. Ultimately, these facilities inadvertently fostered camaraderie among these youths, often amplifying the influence of the already deeply troubled. Contrary to expectations, Juan found himself targeted within the correctional facility, not due to his physical stature or menacing appearance, but as a victim of severe bullying. Physical assaults and harsh verbal taunts became a daily ordeal. Amid this grim backdrop, a fellow inmate named Luis Anibal, merely 2 months older than Juan, entered the scene. Sharing a background of financial hardship, Luis's mother worked as a cleaner, but he had not been placed for adoption. Luis's circumstances were even more dire, with an abusive stepfather, mistreatment of his mother, and his sister subjected to similar horrors. Luis Anibal found himself on a perilous path marked by thefts and altercations, eventually leading him to the correctional facility. His presence there was not the consequence of a specific crime, but rather a desperate measure enacted by his mother, who hoped to redirect him onto the right track, only to inadvertently exacerbate his situation. Extended stays in the correctional facility, combined with shared experiences and a profound sense of disconnection from mainstream society, brought together these young men who struggled to forge connections elsewhere. In a bold endeavor, they even hired a taxi driver on an hourly basis to impart driving lessons. In no time, they became proficient behind the wheel of a car, coincidentally a taxi. The prospect of learning to drive infused these young men with excitement, for it heralded the initiation of their car theft endeavors. Their maiden foray into auto theft involved a Hyundai Accent, a venture that left no casualties, except for Juan and Anibal themselves, who, presumably due to nerves, met with a road mishap. Providentially, their escapade went unnoticed, and they managed to elude capture. Their subsequent car theft also ended in an encounter with law enforcement. However, they had meticulously prepared for such an eventuality, carrying counterfeit credentials purporting them to be the offspring of officers stationed in Quito. It goes without saying that these claims were entirely fabricated, unbeknownst to the genuine officers. Fortuitously for the boys, they were intercepted by a sergeant and a corporal who were unacquainted with the officers they impersonated, hence readily accepting the spurious credentials. Inquisitive officers questioned the boys about the car, intuitively discerning that it was unusual for the child of an officer to possess such a vehicle. Displaying remarkable cunning, the boys explained that it was a stolen car their father had managed to recover. The officers, harboring suspicions, suggested changing the vehicle's tires. It's important to note that some may not be familiar with the prevalent practice in Latin America, where police recover stolen cars, strip them of valuable parts for resale, and subsequently lay blame on the thieves for causing damage to the vehicle. The boys consented, offering to replace any components with lower quality substitutes in exchange for monetary compensation. The officers agreed, and an arrangement that left all parties content ensued. This modus operandi persisted for a while, initially yielding limited results. While leaving a disco with friends on November 22, 1991, the Juan and his group took a taxi. Hermosa pulled out a pistol obtained through a guard, shooting the driver in the head and killing him instantly. One of his friends then drove the vehicle to the southeast of the city and disposed of the body in the Los Chios Valley, where the body was found by police the next day. A week later, Hermosa went with other members of his gang to a hairdresser where he usually fixed his hair, operated by a transgender named Charlie. Charlie invited them to drink at home, where they started an argument which ended in Hermosa shooting Charlie 5 times before he could ask for help. Hermosa's crimes totaled 22 murders, occurring in only 4 months, claiming the lives of 8 taxi drivers, 11 homosexuals, a truck driver and his acquaintance, as well as 2 others, earning him the nickname, the Kid of Terror. The victims were shot to death with a pistol, the crimes occurring during the weekends, which caused a panic among the taxi drivers and homosexuals who lived in northern Quito. One fateful morning, patrolling officers were alerted by what sounded like gunshots, prompting them to initiate a strategic sweep of the vicinity. Guided by the direction of the gunshots, they arrived on an almost deserted street, where a taxi was observed traversing the area. Reacting swiftly, the officers accelerated, overtaking the taxi and discerning the presence of several minors inside. Recognizing that the police were in pursuit, the young individuals accelerated, yet the officers were undeterred, maintaining their vigilance. And when they realized that escaping in the taxi wasn't going to be possible, they stopped and opened all 4 doors to run in opposite directions. They were only able to capture one suspect, and that was Luis Aníbal. Luis was taken to the police station, and they began questioning him to get a confession, but he didn't utter a single word. Days passed, along with threats because the taxi he fled from belonged to a man who had been murdered a few hours earlier. Still, Luis remained silent until a group of boys came to visit him to see what was going on with him. This seemed odd to the police because they had kept this capture hidden, and only a few relatives knew that Luis was there. These boys, seeing that Luis couldn't get out, left the place. But the officers, seeing that the presumed suspects were minors, and their profile matched perfectly, assigned an undercover officer to see what their next moves would be. Throughout the day, the detective saw that these boys seemed to spend the whole day together, hanging out in the streets. In the evening, they entered a nightclub, and more agents were called to see if they would take the bait that was about to be set. In the early morning, when the boys left the nightclub, a taxi passed nearby, and they stopped it. Several agents were already following the taxi, and indeed, these boys had the intention of assaulting the taxi driver, but he was also an agent, and practically the whole gang of terror was captured. But their leader, Juan, had not been with them. Under pressure, the boys confessed, but they claimed they were not responsible for the murders and that Juan Carlos was the culprit. Juan Carlos was the name Juan Fernando used to have a different identity as a criminal and protect his real identity. In contrast, Luis used the alias Santiago. The police began to investigate Juan Fernando Hermosa and found his address. At that time, Juan lived with Zoila, and Rafael was not at home. On January 14, 1992, in the early morning, several officers began to surround Juan's house and entered through a skylight. Juan realized this, grabbed his gun, and a shootout ensued. Unfortunately, since he was sleeping in the same bed with his mother, and she may not have heard due to her deafness, she stayed in bed. In the exchange of fire, Zoila was hit by 19 bullets, leading to her death. Juan attempted to escape, threw a grenade at the police, and when he was climbing out of a window to escape, he was captured. Subsequently, following Juan's grenade launch, testimonies surfaced from both Juan and the neighbors, attesting that it was, in fact, the police who had lobbed the grenade. Countless enigmas envelop the circumstances leading to Zoila's tragic fate. It raises questions about why she was swiftly transported away in an ambulance when it was patently evident that she had already departed from this world. Standard procedure dictates that when someone is unmistakably deceased, they should remain at the scene for forensic evaluation. Upon his arrival at the police precinct, Juan unambiguously declared, as I quote, "I want to clarify that my name is Juan Fernando Hermoso Suarez, and on February 28th, I will celebrate my 16th birthday." This stratagem was employed to exploit legal provisions, given his status as a minor, and it elicited an explosion of media coverage. Juan ascended to a newfound level of notoriety, capturing the headlines in every newspaper. On numerous occasions, he participated in interviews for which he received compensation. Juan took all the blame for himself and wanted to leave his companions out of it. However, seeing that he also didn't want to receive many years in prison, he began to create excuses, claiming that a supposed general, who does exist, had hired him to commit all these crimes because of the death of his daughter, which was attributed to a supposed taxi driver. This was taken seriously because the other kids also started saying the same thing. The authorities were so stirred by this that they seriously began to investigate the general. They asked these kids about how he looked, and they said he was of average height and had prominent hair, but that wasn't accurate. He was tall and always had a military haircut. It also makes perfect sense that a general with all the connections in the world would hire a 15-year-old kid like Juan, who was a complete stranger. The authorities dismissed the accusations, and Juan began to make more excuses. Now he claimed that the taxi drivers were responsible for their own deaths. Clearly, he was still a child. He insisted that the last thing he wanted was to kill. He stated, "I asked them to stay still, that nothing would happen to them. But that didn't happen. Once again, I was threatened with a revolver, so I used my weapon. And a taxi driver tried to hit me with a lug wrench, so I was also forced to shoot." But even if that were true, this excuse wouldn't hold up because he had murdered 22 people by that point. There was no way he could be saved because he was young. It's not like he was suddenly going to turn his life around, and Juan confirmed this. At the time of his trial, Juan was already 16 years old and was sentenced to just 4 years at an orientation center because that was the maximum penalty for a minor in Ecuador. Juan underwent several psychological exams, which mostly described him as an organized psychopath. This type of psychopath tends to be natural leaders, and it was within 16 months of being in that center that Juan formed a gang and devised a plan to escape. He had a girl who had accompanied him in a previous taxi robbery arranged to meet him on the day of his visits. They had agreed that she would deliver a pistol to him so he could escape. In a juvenile center, the security wasn't as high, and Juan knew that at some point there would only be one guard watching the exit. When this happened, he seized the opportunity and shot the sole remaining guard with 5 shots, causing his death. Immediately, Juan and 10 other young people managed to escape from there. The news once again exploded, and somehow, Juan quickly managed to escape to Colombia. Reaching Bogota, he began to live off the sale of stolen jewelry, but being in a new country where he was also being pursued, he couldn't steal as easily as he could in Ecuador. So shortly after, he was found, and tired of going hungry, he told the police, "Yes, I am Juan Fernando Hermosa," and he was sent back to Ecuador. He was temporarily placed in a high-security cell, but was soon returned to the same orientation center from which he had escaped before. However, this time, he didn't escape again. He didn't even serve the initial 4-year sentence they had given him, despite having killed a guard and escaped to Colombia. Many couldn't believe it, but in January 1996, Juan was already free, and this obviously caused a lot of resentment in many people who saw the judicial system as a failure. Juan returned to his childhood town, where he began to live with Rafael. In the early days, Juan seemed enthusiastic about finding a job, but no one wanted to hire him until Rafael contacted a friend who could give Juan a job in a bus collecting money. He started working and gradually began to enjoy the nightlife again, although it is assumed that he only went out to party and consume alcohol. On February 26, 1996, Juan had gone out with some friends to a bar around 10 p.m. At 12, the bar owner asked him to leave because the more the other customers consumed alcohol, the more they expressed their disgust for Juan, as his face and what he had done were known throughout the country. He had no choice but to board a bus and leave. 2 days later, Rafael received a call from the police, informing him that they had found what appeared to be his son's body near a river. The body was unrecognizable, not due to decomposition, but because it had been beaten, tortured, and assaulted in every possible way, even run over by a car with his hands tied with wire. He was only identified as Juan because he had his identification in his pockets, and next to the body, they had left a newspaper clipping that said, "The Hermoso Syndrome," throughout the country. The body was found on the same day that Juan was supposed to turn 20. Some say that the perpetrators were contacts of the officers he had deals with, but it could have been anyone because this young man had made enemies from all sides. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon.